Welcome to the Inferno Cast. Today's guest is a clinical psychologist, a professional speaker, published author, and founder of The Breathing Class. You may recognize her from Good Morning America, The Today Show, Inside Edition, amongst others. Please welcome Belisa Vranich.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We met through a friend. I wanted to kind of get to how you got integrated into the martial arts circles because clinical psychologist, you write books on breathing, you're educated and smart, we punch each other in the face. How did we get connected? So I was going to let you kind of give us a quick background of how you kind of became aware of combat sports.
Sure. And I mean, they're not that different one from the other at the end of the day because words can be painful as well. So anyway, I grew up watching a lot of wrestling. So like my first memories of combat sports is just watching hours and hours of wrestling. My brother wrestled, the boyfriend I had all through high school wrestled. So that's what I watched and that's what I grew up on. And I love it. A lot of my female friends they don't understand what's going on, but when you really like it and you've grown up on it, you see all the things going on. When there's blood, it doesn't bother you. You can see when something was done well. So I grew up with that. And then my dad was also Army. So I spent the whole time with him, putting up his hands like pads and going like, okay, go, like 1, 2, 1, 2. So it kind of is in my blood in that way. And then years later, it was after college, I was bartending and I had a bar back who was into Muay Thai. And this was a long time ago. I mean, no one knew what Muay Thai was. This is way before the beginning fights with just way before the Gracies and just a million years ago. And he got everybody to work out in this basement of a tenement building pretty much doing Muay Thai. And it was hard as hell, but I loved it. And that sort of got me in that road. And then of course I got injured. I got a shoulder injury. But my love of martial arts starts way back. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a cool story. And a lot of people have that where they had a connection with somebody when they were a kid, a family member or something like that. Yeah. So now you're a clinical psychologist, which a lot of people, all those things mean a lot of different things. So if you would kind of give us a quick rundown of clinical psychology and what you do as far as evaluation, treatments, or what that expertise gives you as far as what you do for people.
So I don't have a traditional background when it comes to being a psychologist because I do have a little bit of a vocational ADD. So as I was a psychologist and I would sort of conquer one job, the best thing for me was okay, well, let me start again somewhere else so I could learn just a whole new job. And I really actually liked that. It was not the smartest thing to do financially, but it kept me happy. So I have done all sorts of things. I've taught, the ink blots, the Rorschach blots. Yeah. I've taught that class on teaching people how to do the ink blots. I've worked with doing parole assessments with ex-cons. I've done all kinds of group therapy. I've done IQ testing. I even worked in magazines. I was a health and sex editor for Men's Fitness magazine. So I pretty much was trying to do as many different things as I could within psychology because learning more about psychology in every single facet made me happy. So yeah.
Isn't the priority of the clinical psychology area a little bit more of assessment type where it's like identifying patterns and how to basically categorize them? Is it more focused on that than it is treatment, or is it kind of a balance 50-50?
Well, it depends if you like assessment more. So if you like diagnosis, you can actually focus on, I'm the person who differentiates, whether someone is bipolar and has an addiction, or whether they're schizophrenic or it's just a psychotic episode. That you can actually be more of a diagnostician, or you can be specialized more in the therapy part of things. I did a little bit of both. I actually really like diagnosis. So when someone says something about multiple personality and they're really talking about schizophrenic, I actually feel the urgency to explain that they're not alike at all. And of course I'm terrible to take to movies because if they depict someone who has a mental health problem and it's not correct, I get very upset.
Yeah.
But then there's the therapy, which is, you have all different types of therapies. It could be psychoanalytic, so you're Freudian. It can be psychodynamic, which is, a lot of interaction and taking from different places. It can be cognitive behavioral, all these different types of therapies. But I've done both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey, okay. So a lot of times, the psychology field is overwhelming for people. And I think that a lot of times people underestimate the amount of physiology that you actually have to be involved with and aware of, as far as how the body physically interacts and physically works or has chemical interactions, which, with your work and the breathing techniques and how oxygenation affects the body, I would say that that is an area that you probably spend a lot of time and you've been able to make some connections. So what triggered your first impulse to think, man, there's got to be something connected to this physiology piece of how we control our body or how we influence our emotions through breathing?
Well, I have to tell you, more doctors need to consider the person holistically. So I wish I had gotten more training about the physiology of people, because sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Not everything is a metaphor for something else.
Yeah.
Someone
I've
says
heard
they
that comment. And people may not know where that comes from, but I think that was Freud, and he was at a
Yeah.
conference one time, right? And somebody asked him,
Yeah.
why are you smoking that cigar if it's a phallic thing? And he
Yeah.
said a cigar is just a cigar. Yeah, well
Sometimes it's
played.
just a
Touche.
cigar. Thank you. Yeah. But so, and often you have people that it's always about the metaphor. It's always about how you feel about a certain thing, or they're always trying to attach it to something else to then make an interpretation, and often it's just exactly what it is. So I really wish that doctors, and therapists would consider the physiology and actually look at both more often. And so I didn't get as much training as I would have liked, but I definitely now look at the person and think about not just the metaphor, not just the experience, but I also look at, are they hungry? Are they tired? Are they sleep deprived? Are they really irritated?
Yeah.
You have to look at that day and how they're coming into you that day, how their body feels. Are they in pain? Maybe it's not personal. Maybe that injury is really hurting so badly, it's finally taking a toll on their mood, and it's not about their mother. So,
Right.
yeah.
It could almost maybe be like a slight level of psychosomatic transition, where it's like you're dealing with something, causes frustration, changes biochemicals, and that just has a physiological effect, where it's
Yeah.
just like my body is feeling the stress and the strain because I didn't sleep well last night. And it just, this chain of events that goes back to where maybe it's not deep rooted,
Yeah.
something simple as in, stress at work or something of that nature, which, kind of gets to what you're talking about, is balancing the body through these breathing techniques. So how did you discover that there was a connection there that you could actually measure, monitor, and teach people to improve?
So Caleb, if you don't mind, I'm actually going to go back to your last question for just a second, because I have a really, I'm remembering something where one of the things I ask folks is, when's the last time they cried? Because I want to know that. I want to know how they slept, because sleep deprivation can make you really bonkers. That's the clinical word. But I also ask them about when they pooped. Okay, so poop obviously is not the clinical, or the right word, but like I ask them when they pooped, because everybody, no matter what language you speak, is okay with poop. Because if you're experiencing anxiety, but you're constipated, it may not be that you have an anxiety disorder. It may be that your body is so toxic because you haven't had a bowel movement, or you only have a bowel movement once a week. So talking about it is not going to really help you. So I always ask questions that, to the person sitting in front of me, always seem a little, well, what's that about? Why is she
Like,
asking
why
those
does that
things?
matter?
Yeah, what does that matter? But then when I explain it, you wouldn't believe how many people, yes, I do have problems of that sort. And especially with women, you really clear estrogen out of your body through bowel movements. So if you're feeling super irritated and moody, but you're having 2 bowel movements a week, then I'm not going to think about you having an anxiety disorder yet. I'm going to see if I can help you with your constipation first. So
It's
Yeah.
almost
It's
like
not
the
glamorous,
symptoms,
but
it's almost like the symptoms that we're about to deal with or we're dealing with are correlated to so many base factors that you got to check the box on some basics, which goes
yeah.
back to diet, exercise, rest, sleep, digestive system, just like you mentioned. Those things are all correlated. And there's a simple answer when, well, my husband's on third night, third shift. We just started that. I can't sleep, where
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you've been sleep deprived for the last 5 days and you got
Yeah.
this promotion and somebody in the family just passed. Like, there's a
Yeah.
lot of things going on here that may not be you have a schizophrenic problem. It might just be like you're just having a rough week that we need to
Yeah.
cope with.
Yeah.
So
But that's the transition that's beautiful right now, exactly how you set this up, which is that we have to look at the basics. And sometimes we're looking ahead to something that's so much more complicated that we just don't look to see, well, how are you breathing? And that's exactly how I started integrating breathing with my patients, is that I started looking at their anxiety and their depression, and they're breathing in a way that's anxious and depressed. And we're talking about it. And talk therapy is good. Talk therapy helps you heal. But if you're continuing to breathe in a way that's an anxious way of breathing or a depressed way of breathing, then your body doesn't hear that it's time to heal and change to another mood.
yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that anxiety could be a degree of fight or flight mechanism?
Oh, absolutely. You can have someone, if you're breathing in fight and flight, either because something happened or you've been breathing in fight or flight just because you have a breathing disorder that has to do with, hey, I hurt my rib and I can't breathe down here. So now I'm breathing in this shallow, fast way and it causes anxiety. If you stay in that place long enough, you'll end up with the chemistry of a body that's anxious. So it will affect your chemical self. So sometimes when someone comes to me and they just want to know, well, do I have low serotonin and is this medicine going to work? We just go, let's actually just fix the problem and then we can figure out where it came from. But let's start being very aggressive about getting interventions rather than trying to figure out the why and the how. And the breathing I do first because it's fast. And it is always a factor. And it may be the factor that helps everything heal. It may be the one thing, or it may be the thing that's keeping them plateaued. At the very least, it's a part of the problem.
Right. It's almost like somebody's diet. If I called you over the telephone and told you I can't sleep, I can't breathe well, I have all these issues,
Yeah.
one of the first questions you're going to probably ask me is, what do you weigh? What is your height? What is your diet?
Yeah.
Because there are physiological clues. My body's going to be a reflection of those habits, regardless of my circumstance. If I don't set habits that change that physiology, then there's going to be other things that are going to naturally happen where, like you said, we might need to attack my diet before we attack my anxiety disorder, because it could be the diet causing so much discomfort and so much problems in my body that, like you said, the shallow breathing, the hover breaths and things of that nature
Yeah.
that start causing my physiology to change. And then I get biochemical reactions and I'm frustrated and irritated, get caught in a negative loop.
Yep. Yep. And I have to tell you that often, that sounds like I would wait to recommend medications. And sometimes I tell people to wait, like, let's take this apart before we consider medications. But sometimes I say, let's get the medications started right away. So it really depends on the person, because sometimes if I have someone who's anxious, they don't remember having been calm. They actually, right. It's been a decade or 2 decades. So when you say, can you just calm down and feel better for a moment? Like, they can't, because they can't even remember it. So those are moments where I say, hey, you have to get on the medication. Even if we work on taking you off later, but you have to get on it now so your body even knows what we're talking about.
Yeah. It's almost like mental comprehension of what you're trying to explain. It's like when people learn to drive. When somebody learns to drive, their hands are on the wheel, they're checking the mirrors, they're aware, their situational awareness is very limited. And then a few years later, they're on a cell phone, eating a cheeseburger, laughing at their friend, driving with their knee, because the brain has opened up its awareness, anxiety levels have decreased, and now they're able to see more of what's going on. So whenever you tell like a new driver, oh, you just need to relax more, they don't even know what that means. It's almost like it's a different language.
Yeah,
that they can't
exactly.
comprehend it. And that's one thing as human beings, you know, little egocentric, we struggle with is how do you not see the world how I see it? So when I tell you to relax, why don't you just do what I do?
Yeah.
And that's the struggle. And I think that that's where, you know, educators and people like yourself that create processes to bring people up to a similar standard. So in the martial arts world, you talk about breathing and oxygenating. In my world, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA, Rickson Gracie is the name. That, you know, that's the guy that just started us in the martial arts industry on the breathing and with choke back in the 90s. So how did you get involved with some of the Gracie circles of getting a phone call of like, hey, this lady understands breathing on a scientific level. Let's get some information from her.
So it was Henry Aikens that heard that I was, this was years ago, that I was, it was 10 years ago that I understood and was teaching breathing. And he had gotten hit over and over and over again with what's Rickson's breathing? What is he doing? Why is he doing it? Does it work? You know, and finally he said, this is great. I can take all those questions and just funnel them to you, because obviously he's exceptional at what he does, but he didn't want to be answering that question. And actually what Rickson was doing was pretty baffling to a lot of people for a long time. So that's how I got involved. And of course I started looking at what Rickson was doing. And, you know, I answer that question often about what he's doing. And what it is, if you'd like to know, is that he has a background in yoga, and that is the 3 breaths that he does is a very short Kapalabhati, or breath of fire, but he's ritualized it. So what he has done is that is a natural reaction. So think about when you're done with something and you go, like blowing out, exhaling like forcefully is just something that we humans do, and even animals. They're like, you see a horse, I'm not going to do the horse, but like they will just like shake their heads and shake it off. So that exhale is something we do. You'll catch yourself every day doing that from one circumstance to the next. It's a breath that helps you transition to something else or put an end to something else. So just stop you or help you go to the next thing. And in yoga, it's a breath that purges irritability, according to yoga philosophy. And if you look at when he does it in those moments where he's like, okay, have to focus, want to end and go from here to here. And it makes sense. It actually is something that makes sense. And I know that we were talking about somebody who had a breathing, was it Diego Sanchez? Somebody who did a breathing ritual of his own, and it actually physiologically made no sense. And again, if it works for you, do it.
Yeah.
Like if you have things you pat and, you know, you have to do all these things, like if that works for you, I am all over it. I would never tell you
It kind
not
of
to do
falls
it.
into that placebo effect. It's like, I mean, if you have to go
Yes.
dance around to make it rain and it works, and it go with that. But yeah, when you look at
Totally.
the science of it, of trying to, you know, measure and evaluate, I see what you're saying there.
Yeah. So Rickson has ritualized something that's a very natural thing for people to do, and with a little bit of yoga as well. And people are finding that taking those 3 breaths really helps them because it is a natural reaction. And he does 3. 3 is a number that works for us humans. Ready, set, go. You know,
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. 3 is a number that it means something to us. So the 3 breaths make sense as well. There you go.
Yeah, no, it's funny because that's, you know, because Chris Burns is our mutual friend in Australia, you know, when he connected us, and I was just like, how in the world did you guys drag this poor educated woman into our jiu-jitsu circles? And a lot of times when you see athletes like Rickson who did create this ritual and a methodology with it, even then you see people that perform at that level that they don't really know everything that they're doing. You know, they find
Oh,
what
yeah.
works, and their intuition takes them down that path. And sometimes we need a third party to break it down because we just didn't have that background, that education, or just our bodies are not that sensitive to notice the improvement or the changes that occur. And I think that that's where you're kind of bridging the gap, is helping people understand. So when people oxygenate and breathe better, what are some of the effects that you're like, these are immediate things that are measurable, that you can see scientifically, that's like, when you change your breathing pattern, when you oxygenate this way, this is what happens?
Okay, super simple. It delays fatigue. So you have more gas. And delays fatigue is from the scientific literature that started being performed, started being done 8 to 10 years ago. There are two researchers I really love, Alison McConnell and Mitch Lomax, and they started looking at working your breathing muscles and what that did to performance. And what they found is that with endurance athletes, so cyclists, swimmers, runners, is that if you worked out your breathing muscles, it delayed fatigue. And those are the scientific words. To us, just I have more energy. I don't bonk as quickly. Have a bounce in my step. I don't hit that wall. I have more gas. So that literature, that sports science was fascinating to me. And it continues to be, that if you work out your breathing muscles, all 11 pounds of them, because it's a lot of breathing muscles, is that you will actually be able to have better conditioning and endurance without doing cardio. And that, I still say it now, and I'm like, that's kind of mind blowing. And it is.
Well, it's helping making an efficient system more efficient, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, and when you ask people like, where's the strength in the body? It's in the core. Well, what's the core doing? You know, it's a lot of times it's controlling that breathing, you know, and it makes sense that that's such a focal point of the muscles that are doing that. So now what about emotionally? What is breathing techniques and oxygenation doing to us emotionally and chemically?
It is how you control your arousal, period. I mean, when I work with first responders and how you calm yourself down, yes, visualizing is important. Yes, what you say to yourself, self-talk is important, but all those things affect the breath, and the breath affects the nervous system. So if you can take the breath and lower it in your body and extend the exhale, make it a diaphragmatic breath, extend the exhale, obviously breathe through your nose, is that you're going to have more choices as far as your arousal. Because right now, in general, we're lousy at this. We have on and we have off, and all the nuance in between, we have nothing. And
what? Polarized? No way. American? The world?
Oh,
no.
yeah.
Never.
Exactly.
So when you look at it from a psychological standpoint, people that struggle with anxiety, they struggle with fear, they struggle feeling like they have influence over themselves physically and emotionally, how can you get them started or get them moving on a breathing technique that gets them results that they can feel this deceleration happen or the de-escalation occur?
Well, sometimes they need to upregulate, because sometimes we're so numb that, you know, we look for other things to try to get us to feel alive. So whether that's, you know, caffeine or cutting or whatever it is that makes you feel like you're alive, sometimes we're just numb. So it can be in both directions. And the breathing, the thing I focus on is where are you breathing from? It's called your location of movement. So are you breathing from the top of your body? Are you breathing from the bottom? Are you breathing from the middle? Like where is the breath on your body? And that's, again, I really focus on the mechanics. So I want to know what part of your lungs are you using and what muscles are you using? Plain and simple. That's where my baseline is. And I look at someone just like you look at someone's posture, just like you look at someone's gait or how they sit at their desks. I look at it exactly like that.
So would you say that you could almost look at postural alignment and dictate how they breathe and therefore make an inference on some of the struggles or challenges they have?
Absolutely. Your posture definitely impacts your breathing. So if you are a rib gripper, or if you are scissors open, if you sit a lot, if you are overweight, or if you are really lanky, all those things are going to impact your breath. So for instance, if I'm working with someone who has a really tight core and they're lanky, I'm not going to focus as much on their exhale because they're already in an exhale. I'm going to focus on, can I get you to expand? Can I get your intercostal muscles to spread? And can I get you to breathe in a 360-degree way? And if I have someone who's a little heavier, is that we're going to work on your exhale, and we're going to work on your exhale muscles so you don't get as fatigued. So that's why, to me, when I watch someone fight, depending on their body type, yes, you're tired because you're not inhaling. Or yes, you're tired because your exhale is so poor that your next inhale is awful. Yeah.
Right. And it kind of causes the chain reaction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So when
So
you
that's
look
the
at
first
somebody,
thing.
when you have, because I feel like it's almost like a stimulus question where it's like I have people that are highly sensitive to stimuli and people that are not very sensitive to stimuli. When you have somebody that has a low sensitivity to stimulus, what would you do to help them of like the type of breathing exercise they need to do, what the oxygen does for them? How can it help them be a little bit more acute or engaged to be able to almost be more involved with their surrounding environment? Because like you said, they get very recessed, they move back because they're just numb. So what would you do to help change that physiology and that breathing that could create some emotional results?
So describe a little bit more. I want to make sure that I understand the type of person I have in front of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with somebody that they struggle with human interaction.
Mm-hmm.
They struggle with a confidence problem, self-image. A lot of their self-worth and value comes from the external. They are not able to voice their opinion very well. They're very introverted, and they struggle being a performance athlete because of the pressure, because of the struggle sometimes. And sometimes they don't even see themselves as a performance athlete. They start a kickboxing class, jiu-jitsu class. They're just not quite there, but they're usually very kept to themselves, meek, mild, and almost fearful.
Yeah.
So with that type of predisposition, what do we need to do?
So I think, there's a lot of people that talk about, Brian McKenzie is one of my favorite people that talks about fear. And it's a fascinating topic, is how you react to fear. Does it stunt you, or is it information? It certainly isn't. That's something that I would actually refer, when it comes to fear, I would refer to other people that are really good at it. But when I have someone who is fearful, is that usually what happens to the body is that you move less. So folks think about fight or flight when they think fear. And that's actually good. Like if you could get to fight or flight when you're scared, like at least you got a choice of two things that are movement. But the less talked about one is freeze. And freeze isn't as sexy because like you're not fighting and you're not running, you're just kind of freezing. But we see it all the time. We see it all the time with first responders when all of a sudden something happens and you just can't move your body. You feel like everything is locked up and time changes. And that type of feeling, you can walk around, a good part of the day feeling like, I don't want to do something that might disturb the outside world. I don't want people to look at me. And it comes from the fear of disrupting or getting attention that you don't know what to do with. And with someone like that, I would probably throw them into the deep side of the pool. And this doesn't sound very sympathetic of me, but it would always be with love and with good ethics, is that doing the active meditation can help with that. And the active meditation is a trance breath-led breathing method, which comes from years and years and years ago. I mean, they did rebirthing and holotropic breathing. This is not something that I have come up with or that Wim Hof has come up with. It's something that people have done for a very, very long time and given it all sorts of names. But that type of breathing would actually be good for someone who is feeling fearful and maybe timid. As long as, and this is a big, as long as, it's done where he or she feels really safe and feels like just safe. And sometimes it's hard to understand feeling safe, but when you do trance breathing, when you do the controlled hyperventilation, you have to feel like the person that's in the room is taking care of things. And I know that I have this problem. I can't just do the trance meditation, which is a controlled hyperventilation. It's super easy. There's no magic. Controlled hyperventilation that then lowers your guard and your inhibition, and you can let some steam off by laughing or crying. It's not magic. But if I'm not with a person that I know, if someone came in, they would handle it. If I don't know the doors are closed, if I don't know like things aren't going to ring or someone's going to need me, I need to really think that the person that's sort of sitting and holding space for me actually is holding space. Like they could handle a situation if something happened. And that's my own background of, that's my own background. But like when you hold space for someone and when you do a meditation with them, they have to feel like whatever they need, you have to be able to offer them, whether that's quiet, whether that's being able to tolerate the ugly And that's a very big deal, because sometimes when you do that breath, it can feel like all kinds of awful memories or just crying and tears are coming out. I know that years ago when I started doing it, I always ask people when I do this in groups, I say, you might giggle or you might cry. And then I say, hey, what was I when I did this? Because then, you know, people can, I did have a very extreme reaction, is that I cried, but I had a lot of stuff that I had buried really deep. And I cried ugly. It was not a pretty cry. It was like just, you know, mascara, and my face got red, and it, you know, just ugly. And you have to be able to know that the person with you won't judge you, won't go like, oh my God, she's so ugly and dramatic, or wow, he's really weak, he's crying. And once that situation is set up, your person that is more timid or more withdrawn, if they do it over and over and over again, all of a sudden they realize it's going to be okay. Like, this is all right. This person is tolerating it. I'm letting go of shit. Maybe I don't even know what that shit is. And I remember going into the DEA, and I did this. Nobody wanted to do meditating, but they did want to do a recovery breath. So I said, okay, it's not meditating, it's a recovery breath. And they did it. And I said, you, first of all, because when you go into to work with first responders, if you say a psychologist, the first thing that happens is people they fold their arms and they tip back. Because they're
You're
like,
the fastest way to get them fired.
Yeah, I'm like,
like
everything's fine. So I remember saying, you don't have to tell me what's wrong. You don't even have to know what's wrong. And that's really freeing, of like, oh, good. I don't have to figure it out, and I don't have to tell you. I'm there. Anyway, that's a very long-winded story
well, no,
on
I mean,
how
but I
I
think
work
it's
with them.
extremely valid, because like when you talk about taking somebody into that situation with that type of breathing exercise, you're breaking that pattern, which is what their kind of fear is, you know, is
Yeah.
disrupting the pattern. And a lot of people, they run that same pattern for so long, they don't even know why they're doing it. Like you said, they don't even know what the issues are, but they need to break out of it, which is, I think, sometimes where that type of personality type maybe gets a negative loop that is almost encouraging the behavior, because they will hit a threshold, like a boiling point, and then it explodes. And then, of course, you know, this rush of emotions and all of these chemicals, and then they feel better. And the body and the brain, you know, almost is so simplistic sometimes, it starts repeating the pattern that says, well, if we want the relief again, we have to go back to the beginning where we go through all this terrible misery. And then at some point, it will pop, and then we will feel better again. And this almost gives them a biohack where you can kind of skip those steps and understand that it's inside of them. So, I mean, that's very insightful.
Yeah.
And I think it was very clear picture for people to see what the environment putting them. So now let me give you another one. The overcompensation personality. You know, I'm loud, I'm forward, I'm a little bit belligerent, but we know it's rooted in insecurity, you know, and I try to perform well physically, but I never give it quite 100%, but I try to appear as this athlete, as I'm like, oh yeah, I'm out on the front line, you know, punching and kicking and working hard, or I'm the voice of reason whenever I'm seeking that, maybe not for the most authentic reason, but to kind of be a compensation to make me feel better. But I mean, visually, that's going to be a much more open person, but you can sense the insecurity. And of course, when tested or whenever opposed very much, they usually crumble. So when you're dealing with somebody like that, and some of the usual quirks that come with that personality of the loud voice and opinion on everything in the mix and everybody's business a little bit, what kind of advice are you giving them to kind of oxygenate, and rituals for them to maybe get control over that?
So that person is one of your athletes they're in a constant sympathetic state. They're in the sympathetic dominant, and that's where they live. And if things aren't like that, they'll make things be like that so that they can feel comfortable. So in that case, the person has to start to be able to have a flexibility. They have to be okay with the quiet when they're by themselves, and they have to be able to rev up because they're always in sympathetic. So several things. They have to understand, first of all, is that you can never get someone to do things if they don't want to do it. Like, it's really, really hard. So they have to understand the worth in it. And with any athlete, longevity of career and flexibility in being able to get into flow and into their intuition to do what they do well. That's always like, that always helps them. So with your sort of more aggressive person, when they understand that down-regulating can be hard and that it's challenging, they will dedicate themselves to that. So if I say, okay, you can do 800 exhale pulsations. So those hard things, they love that. I can do exhale pulsations. And I go, okay, how low can you bring your heart rate? You know, and I have folks who go like, I don't know. And boy, this is really hard. And how long can you extend your exhale? And then in the active meditation, there's a second part to it where you just let go. And that's usually when you get memories and flooding of emotions. Can you let go? Because often that person, I'm going to say that guy, but I mean man or woman, is holding on so tight to what they believe in who they are that letting go is really frightening. So those are the sort of exercises I would go with.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes sense because you've mentioned two things that intrigue me. One is the emotional flooding. You brought it up twice. Of it allows people to almost address or see issues they've had in the past, or these emotions they haven't dealt with or coped with that they've kept bottled up. Would you say that a lot of times these struggles and tendencies people have are a reflection of them trying to protect that vulnerability, or, you know, to stay away from that pain they've once felt?
Oh yeah, I mean, all of this is coping strategies that often worked well before. So I'm definitely not saying take someone's coping strategies and pull them away, because they're actually more at risk. And that's why I always say I hate that movie Good Will Hunting, because that moment where they break the kid down and is terrible. You know, he had a coping mechanism that was kind of working okay, but you didn't substitute it for anything else. You just let them walk through the door. So
it's like the cold turkey method, which is not good for emotions.
You know, make sure that you have other support system and that it's done within a context that's healing. So it's not just about the dramatic cathartic moment. And you have to be careful, because a lot of folks nowadays who are, you know, teaching breathing or going to breathing sessions are looking for that dramatic cathartic moment. And there's a lot of work to do afterwards. I mean, there's some prep to do before, but then you should take what happened and you should journal, and you need to be gentle with yourself and figure it out. It's not just, hey, let me crack this open, cry, and it's done, because it's not. It could be, you know, it could be that you feel worse the next day because all of a sudden this coping mechanism that you've been using of denial or of disassociating, or, you know, whatever it is that you've been using, now you don't have it and you start having panic attacks. And I've had that happen.
Well, I mean, would you agree that probably a large percentage of the population is trying to assert control over their lives and environment?
Absolutely. I mean, we all would like to think we control something, and
Then that goes
nowadays we
back
control
to,
nothing.
yeah, exactly. And so then that goes back to exactly your point. That's like, well, when everybody has this base of control in their life that makes them feel better, and you just took away the coping mechanism, which is how they felt in control for most of their life, I mean, it's like it's going to be worse before it's better. And that's where being around the proper education and influences and support system for people to get over those types of struggles or challenges. But it seems like most people don't understand that the symptoms that they're facing right now are usually rooted in something much deeper. And diving deeper is fearful and scary because it's moving away from what makes them feel better on the short term. But they just don't know, once again, to the driving the car example, they don't know what they don't know. They don't know how free they can be. Like you said, they can't relax. They don't know how calm they can actually be. They don't know how happy they can truly be or how fulfilled they could be. And it's trying to help people achieve that. So when you look at something like the martial arts or athletics and you see these transformations that come out of people, what do you really think the core transformation really was? Because it's not, I know how to punch, kick, and do Muay Thai now. Suddenly I had a Muay Thai deficiency in my life. Usually that's not what it really is. So what do you feel is truly happening to these people that are becoming a different person?
So you get to stumble and fall and see that you won't die. So I think that, you know, that's why I tell my friends who have kids, especially girls, is that teach them how to fall. Like teach them how to take a punch, a little punch. But
Yeah.
but as kids, like we need to fall down a lot to realize, not be scared of falling. So how often as an adult do you tuck and roll? And we have to, like, I think that with martial arts and, you know, especially jiu-jitsu, is that you're on the floor and you're losing, or at least you're losing part of the time. You're on your back, you know, but you don't die, because your ego and your brain is feeling like this is death. But the fact is that you could just, you keep, and that's why it's so addictive. And I got to tell you, my jiu-jitsu friends now are going through such a hard time not having jiu-jitsu, that it's painful for me when I hear that gyms are closing again. And I understand the why, but you know, it's so hard anyway. But so just once you become guarded and you don't do things because they scare you, then your world becomes smaller. And I'll give you an example of when people come to see me, one of the things I do is I put them upside down. Okay. So I don't physically take them and put them upside down, but I use 2 boxes of paper and put their head in there, and they flip upside down. And it's an assisted headstand. It comes from like a supported headstand where your head is not on the ground, your shoulders are. That's done for older adults and injured folks in yoga. Like, it cannot be safer. The adults that I make go upside down and seeing them freak out is so interesting. And it's because as kids, we rolled on the ground. We were upside down in the water. We were upside down on monkey bars, on trees. Like, we were just, our perspective was always in different directions, which is also what martial arts gives you once you get to the floor, is that you have a perspective from different directions and you're still okay. But to your adult, if you're not up and down, things are wrong, which means that there's a lot of places where you're going to feel really uncomfortable unless you practice them.
It's almost like you're giving people a talent of buoyancy. You know, like if you're in water, that's like if you're going to float or if you're going to ride with the waves, because you mentioned flow state earlier. All the high level athletes that I speak with and talk about flow state in surfing. Roy Dean talked about flow state in skiing, you know, of course, within jiu-jitsu. And, you know, these people talk about this flow state where, and I feel like I look at it as you're in that moment between moments where, like, the past exists, but it's not your focal point. The future is there because you have to plan where you're going, but it's very fluid, and you're just kind of in that moment. And it's almost as if when you hit that flow state or in that present moment, you detach from everything around you, and that creates almost a level of buoyancy in which you get very flexible. Your perspective can shift and change, and you're not adhering and trying to attach to these constructs of, I have to have this job, I have to have this grade, I need to have, you know, this house, I need to perform like this, I can never make a mistake. And like you said earlier, people need to have more practice failing whenever we're in a society that's going the other way. You know, like, the sport's not for you. Oh, my kid tried soccer. He just doesn't like it because he's terrible at it. Like, of course he doesn't like it whenever he's not good at it. But what lesson is it worth? And I actually heard, it was Pedro Sauer, I think, that was talking about this, where he said, how valuable is it to teach a kid to fail often? And, you know, I actually was watching a documentary, and this lady was talking about how her family, that was something that her dad asked her all the time every week, was like, you know, so what did we fail at today or this week? And that became a really important lesson because she didn't fear failure. And when you don't fear failure, usually success is the result, because you're not going to hit the home run first time. There's just no way. Yeah.
And it's not the end of the world either, you know, but the rolling, I mean, rolling and bumping your head, you're not going to be, you know, you can always tell in schools when there's the little girl who has brothers, right? Where she's had to toughen up because she has brothers. And maybe they haven't, like, beat her up, but, you know, it's kind of rough and tumble at her house. And she's in an advantage because if she gets knocked down, she's not, it's you get up again because it's not the end of the world. She doesn't get stunned by getting knocked down. So yeah.
If you had to identify one or two just core rooted human needs that everybody is chasing. If you had to pare it down to a generic, this is why human beings behave, internal, external, if you had to chisel that down to something very specific, what do you feel like that driving need is that is creating the human condition?
You know what? There's a book called A Day in the Life of Ivan Desanovich. I'm pretty sure it's that. And it's about a man who's in a concentration camp. And every day they build a wall with bricks, and then they pull it down. And then they build the wall, and then they pull it down. And I think that, to me, it was a really meaningful story, because I've also worked with ex-cons and parolees, is that people need to feel like they can do something. And even if the work isn't, mind-blowing, but that they can feel that like they can build something and they have something to do, and that there's some level of pride in doing something well. They need to have things to do. I think people get in a lot of trouble when they can't build or create, or they're bored, or they just
it's
don't.
Almost like they need to contribute to something.
And it doesn't have to be
engaged.
It doesn't have to be crazy. It can be that brick wall, which are, tremendously, not the brick wall, but a brick wall. But it can be, it's just the feeling of, I have done something and this is my contribution. And as a society, if we could give everyone things to do that they were recognized for their contribution of what they were doing, you wouldn't have a lot of problems, I think.
Well, I mean, think how many problems we face in the world because people are just honestly seeking relevance. I mean, because especially like when you look at social media and platforms we have now, there's people that are seeking truth and there's people that are seeking relevance. And a lot of times they get convoluted, where seeking the truth makes me relevant, therefore I do it in a manner that is not productive or as productive as it could be. But we're in a position now where it's almost like our world is creating more drugs for us that are not chemicals, but they are giving us these feelings of relevance and significance and, take charge. And my fight or flight just got triggered because I was on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube. And so it's almost replacing the human experience of creating biochemical reactions in an unhealthy way instead of finding a way to create those biochemical reactions in a healthy way. When you're trying to advise or influence somebody on positive, negative, neutral ways to change their biochemistry or to change themselves into being more fulfilled and finding those releases in healthier ways, what's the advice you usually give people?
I say do volunteer work. Go to nature, we've been hearing, and I think that's super important. But when you're feeling badly, or even when you're not, when you're feeling grateful, you should be doing volunteer work. Everybody should be. And I don't know why this isn't even taught in schools, is that you need to always give back in some way. And that gives you terrific perspective. It also changes your mood. It makes you interact with someone. And not nowadays, but because nowadays is really difficult. But in modern times, it's pretty easy because you go onto the internet and every town has a mayor's alliance that tells you about volunteer work. I mean, it's so easy now with the internet to find volunteer work to do. It doesn't have to be, people used to think big brothers and big sisters, and that's a 2-year commitment. That's a lot. But what happens if it is just going and, helping an animal shelter clean up or delivering food to older adults? Everyone should do volunteer work and not wait till they're retired. Whenever I hear that, it makes me nuts. No,
if you
today.
Don't do it now, you're never going to do it. Yeah, it's
now
kind of like
is part of your life.
Yeah, it's kind of like the old adage: if you won't give a dime out of $1, you'll never give whatever it is out of $1 million or 10 million. It's in your nature, which you can program your nature to attach to those things because it's a stimulus response. And when you look at people that do volunteer work or people that contribute to a larger cause or something bigger than themselves or just give of themselves, they will be the first ones to tell you that that is one of the most rewarding experiences and it just, again, it just gives so much back to them. They don't understand why. And when you look at it, we're biochemically wired to do that because you get such a better result out of people. I usually ask people, I'll ask them sometimes, like, what's your greatest goal that you could ever want to achieve? And they'll, it's this job, this car, this money. I'm like, when you get the goal, what's the first thing you're going to do? And if it's money, they're like, I'm going to buy a house. But I'm like, okay, so you got the money, you're getting the house. What's the next thing? I'm going to call my friend. I'm going to call my wife. I'm going to call my parents. They want to share the experience with somebody because we are emotionally designed to engage, interact with each other. And I think that you pointing out volunteer work and helping others and pouring into others being so important, that's not just an opinion. I mean, you can biochemically measure it. I mean, you look at those acts when people do that, and it's huge. And so I see that as like an external, because you mentioned something else as far as like people have to feel like they're getting better at something or they're doing something. So it's almost like internal, external. Like external, you need to be contributing and building something and doing something productive. But then internally, they almost need this growth perspective, or I'm getting educated, or I'm moving forward. As I've heard happiness described as progress. To wrap it up into one word, where both internally and externally. So when you're trying to get somebody on track and some momentum to grow more internally, what would you advise them with?
You know what? That is, when I used to be more of a therapist, I would give a lot of homework, which for some people, they hated that because they just wanted to vent. And some folks loved it. They would leave and they had homework, and there was things they had to do between sessions to make the therapy move faster. They love that.
Yeah. The checklist people, the checklist people. I got to check 3
Give
boxes.
me more work.
Yeah.
So you make me think back to the advice I would give them. And I always said, you have to do a martial art or yoga. You have to do volunteer work. And I would always then tell them, you have to do something artistic, even if you're not artistic. You have to go back to see what made you happy before that you've been saying, I'm going to do that later. And you have to journal. And then I'd give them also a list of movies and books that they had to read. So it was sort of a big package, and at least half of those resonated really well with them. So it's not one thing. It's really, you have to have.
It's accumulation of details. It's the accumulation of details. Because what I'm hearing is you're giving people tools to expand their perspective, see things from a different view. You're giving them tools to feel productive, like, hey, you completed this list. You're giving them tools to get a little bit of introspection, like you're going to learn about yourself by doing this and exploring this. You're moving them out of their comfort zone, with doing new things, and you're getting them involved with activities that require a mind-body connection, where the mind and the body have to work together. Because in the modern age, that's probably one of the biggest struggles that I feel like you see, is that the mind and body are separating. Just like whenever they do studies and they measure neurological interactions when people watch television, it's unfounded. Like there's nothing else on the planet that creates that kind of neurological interaction with the brain with no physical movement or use. Like it's an anomaly, and we still don't know if it's a good anomaly or not. We won't know for a while. And so it's so unusual. So, I feel like that's a very well-rounded approach. That obviously, you're educated, you're a doctor. It makes sense that you have a good plan, but of course it has to be catered to individuals, where people, there's not one fit all answer. It's a journey of exploration. Like you kind of keep going to, is it's understanding them, not only emotionally, but just their physical habits and what their lifestyle looks like, because there's all these moving parts, and you have to be looking at those moving parts to make change. And that's my last question, because you mentioned earlier, you can't help people that don't want help. You can't change people that don't want change. How do you help people want to change? What do you have to do to get people to change whenever they are just dug in, against it, addicted to their patterns, don't know any different, emotionally vested in whatever identity or platform they think gives them relevance? How do you change the unchangeable?
I think they have to.
What helps people change? Like not so much what you would do, but how do the unchangeable people come to the realization of it is time to change?
They have to remember a moment that was life-changing as children. I really think that if you remember who you were as a child, and the sparks that you had, or the way maybe the innocence or the sparks or the sense of humor is like, you have to remember that person and find out and pinpoint when you lost them and when they became this, rigid, materialistic adult that you may not even like being anymore. But I think going back into the past and like remembering what it was like to be a kid and missing that kid in yourself is important.
That's awesome. Okay, I have to ask one more. I'm sorry. I'm going to let you go. So, last one, I promise. How do you define fulfillment?
Ooh, I mean, fulfillment is pretty limiting. I think you can say fulfillment today, but I would hope that your idea of fulfillment changes from week to week and year to year, because once you're fulfilled, then you stop. And I think that we should not stop as humans. We should constantly be evaluating what we need more of, what we need less of, how we can be better, how we can be sweeter, how we can be more understanding, all those good mores.
Excellent. Well, awesome advice. Great insight. I'm so thankful that Vern's got us connected. Your books and your articles, because I did a little bit of homework. I mean, it really does have a close connection to what we are doing in the martial arts world. But bigger picture than that is people have got to start understanding how they work spiritually, physically, chemically. Like, they got to understand, like you said, that holistic approach. And I think you really gave some insight, and you gave some good examples that people will be able to attach to, like with the personality types, just because people are going to find some alignment with that, and it's going to just get them intrigued. So then maybe they can go check out your book and do some research and figure out how maybe something as simple as just getting a hold of their breathing and looking at that perspective of it can lead to bigger and better things. Is there anything you'd like to finish today?
Just that you're an excellent interviewer. I've never had somebody take what I say and then just like add to it and make it even more intense. So I loved being here. Thank you for having me and just having this forum to be able to have these conversations. Really happy about it.
I'm glad we're in a position to share, because if there was a time in the world that people need more of this, is definitely the time. So I appreciate you sharing your time. It's valued, and we'll definitely stay in touch.
Thank you, Caleb.